Welcome to the Reading for Wellbeing podcast. I'm your host, Professor Pozzulo. Today I'm talking with Dr. Adam Galinsky, author of Inspire, the universal path for leading yourself and others. Welcome, Dr. Galinsky. Great to have you here and to talk.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Before we get started talking about Inspire, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what made you want to write a book about inspiring others and yourself?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. I've been teaching the material in the book for about 20 years. And so for probably about a decade, I've been wanting to write this book and just needed the opportunity and the time to do that. And fortunately, I had a sabbatical a couple of years ago and I got to spend it in Hawaii. And so I used that time to write the proposal and a bunch of the book. And I believe passionately in the scientific foundation of what I write in the book, and I truly believe that it will make the readers' lives better, but not only the readers' life better, but all the people that come into the orbit of the readers' lives. Because when we inspire others, we make their lives better, but we make our own lives better because when we put out inspiring energy into the world, we get inspiring energy back.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to admit, so your book had me reflecting on my interactions with others. And I must admit, I haven't always been inspiring. Can you talk a little bit about the infuriating, inspiring continuum and what factors make someone more inspiring versus infuriating?
Yeah. So I'll just say a quick background, which is that when we are in a position of leadership, all eyes are on us, right? And people are paying a lot of attention to what we do. Everything we do is going to have a stronger reaction in others. And so one of the things to start off with is I talk about this inspiring and infuriating continuum. And one of the reasons why it's so important is that when everyone gives us our intention, so we don't have to be in a position of leadership. People have to look up to us, right? They have to care about what we do, think about, the beginning of a romantic relationship, you really care about what the other person thinks, right? And so all their behavior, all of their actions are sending signals that are, big and amplified, and our reactions to them are going to be intensified. And so when we're in a position of leadership, when people are looking up to us, we don't have a choice to produce a neutral reaction, right? We're either going to inspire or infuriate. So it becomes really important to recognize that we don't have a choice to produce a reaction, but we do have a choice about the type of reaction. And so one of the things I've discovered in my research, I've been asking literally tens of thousands of people across the globe to tell me about a leader that inspired them, and also about a leader that infuriated them. And what I've discovered pretty quickly and has been confirmed is the fact that the inspiring leader and the infuriating leader are essentially on a continuum. They're kind of mirror images of each other. And just to give you sort of ideas, the inspiring leader is sees this optimistic big picture, whereas the infuriating leader is sort of a pessimistic, pedantic, right? A inspiring leader is a calm and courageous protector. The infuriating leader is an anxious coward, right? And the inspiring leader is someone who's generous and elevates others, and the infuriating leader really diminishes others and is kind of selfish. And so what I've done right there is I've described this sort of continuum, but I've also led into the idea that there's these three universal factors that make up the continuum, and they represent how we see the world, and I call that visionary, and that's that optimistic big picture, how we are in the world, our presence, and that's that calm and courageous protector. I call that the exemplar of desired behavior. And then we have how we interact with the world, the mentor, I call that. And that's, the ways that we sort of elevate others and are generous to others. And so we can start to see, now I just used the word universal, and I'll just add one other piece of insight is that this continuum and these three factors are universal. That means that in every country in the world, the same exact attributes appear. There's not a single attribute that appears in one country that doesn't appear in every country. And one of the things that I say that I wouldn't say I've discovered this as much as I've theorized about this, I would say, is that the reason why these are the three universal factors is because each one satisfies a fundamental human need. So when we're visionary, we satisfy the need for meaning and understanding. When we're an exemplar, we satisfy the need for both protection, but also we might call it like passion and energy. And we're a great mentor, really satisfy that human need for a sense I belong, I'm included on the one hand, but also I'm valued and respected on the other hand.
That's fascinating. It's amazing to think that it crosses, all countries.
Yes.
Whether a society is more individualistic or more collectivistic, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and one of the things I discovered, I first came up with the idea as I was teaching the FBI here in the United States, and someone just told me about a story about a leader that inspired them, and I started to ask the rest of the FBI group, can you tell me about a leader that inspired you? And at the time, I just started teaching for the government in Thailand, and I actually taught for them 16 times over a 13-year period. I started asking the questions there, and then I went to Beijing, and I went to Melbourne, and I went to Buenos Aires, and I went to Israel, and it just Morocco. Didn't matter wherever, Saudi Arabia, right? It just was really remarkable that, we all want to have an optimistic, big picture person. We all want someone who is calm in a crisis. We all want someone who recognizes our contributions.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. In your book, you have a self-assessment. So if someone's wondering, how well they fit one of the two categories, can you talk a little bit about the self-assessment and maybe some of the questions that go with?
Yeah. So, one of the ways, if anyone wants to take the self-assessment, it's on adamgalinsky.com, and you can do it. And we're setting it up now where not only can you take a self-assessment, but you can send it to your coworkers or friends and ask them to rate you. So one of the most important things is like, you might think, oh, I am so visionary, and other people do not see you as visionary, right? So it's really important, that 360 phenomenon. But some of the questions are, kind of what I've already said, right? Like, I'm able to stay calm in a crisis, right? I can see the big picture. I recognize the contributions of others, right? And so it's these attributes. And one of the things I think is really important, the fact that there is this self-assessment and there's these universal attributes, is I think one of the most important implications of this research and essential for well-being and wellness, right, is this idea that leaders aren't just born, but they're made. And the reason why my research really supports that idea is because there's a universal set of attributes. Those can be identified, those can be practiced, they can be developed over time. And I think that is one of the most important things. And you said something really important a minute ago. You said, I reflected on times where I myself wasn't always inspiring. And I think the continuum is really important because we never reach the inspiring end and stay there forever, right? The world, I kind of say, is kind of slanting us towards the infuriating end, right? We get tired or hungry. We have strong emotions. We get into new situations. We feel pressure. And so there's lots of forces that are leading us towards the infuriating side of the continuum. And you may be amazing, but you may lose your temper one day, or you may not recognize the contributions of someone else, or you may get stuck in some meaningless detail that doesn't really matter. And so another really important thing about my research, so one of the things I've studied is the difference between shame and guilt. And guilt is a productive emotion because it motivates change. Shame is I call it a destructive emotion, because shame leads to one of two counterproductive responses: either the ostrich effect, I'm just want to ignore and bury my head in the sand, or it kind of makes us defensive monsters. We want to put all the blame on other people. I have an 8-year-old son, and he has apparently never done anything wrong in his life. And he really, the idea of feeling, responsible for a negative event is so painful for him. And so he'll hit his brother, and I'll, say something about it. And he's like, well, it's really your fault, Dad, because 2 days ago you sneezed, and that led you to do X, and that led me to hit A, and that's the shame response, right? Trying to deny responsibility or try to hide from it. And so one of the things I always tell people is none of us are perfect. I can work so hard at being inspiring, and I'm still going to be infuriating some of the time. And the single most important thing is that we don't experience shame at that. We don't beat ourselves up. We want to hold ourselves accountable and responsible, but we don't beat ourselves up. So we really try hard to say, okay, I was pessimistic in a moment where I needed optimism. Okay, I'm going to be more optimistic tomorrow.
Amazing. One thing that I really loved about your book is you describe the research, and so if, as a reader, you can put yourself into the studies. Do you have a favorite study, and or pick one, and maybe talk a little bit about what the results were with one of your favorite studies?
Sure. I think I might pick two if you don't mind, but
Sure.
I'll do them very quickly. But one of them, one is just we published recently, and I really love this study. And it's in some ways, we worked with the Swiss employment agency, so the governmental agency in Switzerland. If anyone loses their job, they have to go register in person and to get unemployment benefits. And we did a little intervention. So for half the people, we didn't put in the experimental condition, but half we did. And all we did is we said, we want you to think about what your top values are, put them kind of in a hierarchy, and then think about why they matter to you, but also how have you demonstrated your values in the last couple of weeks. And we found that 2 months later, that the people who had gotten the values intervention were almost twice as likely to have found a new job. And in fact, the effect was so strong that we actually ended the experiment and gave everyone the values intervention. And we calculated, that it saved the government, our intervention, just in those 2 months, tens of thousands of unemployment benefit dollars. And, I think that one really, I love the intervention because it's really about the visionary aspect in one way. So part of being visionary, the foundation of being visionary is being in values. But when we reflect on our own values, it kind of gives us this optimistic energy that kind of makes us better exemplars, if you will, right? It helps us tap into our passion. It helps us get less frustrated at rejection, right? It keeps us going forward. And our values really are kind of our motivating anchor, if you will. And so I really love that study. And then the other one I really love is a study that just came out in 2025. The other one came out in 2023, so they're both pretty recent, but a paper titled The Vicious Cycle of Status Insecurity. And one of the things I did with this amazing graduate student here, Maren Hoff, and we have so many amazing studies in this paper, but we just showed basically that when people are feeling insecure about their status, that they want people to see them in a positive light. It actually makes them selfish and try to claim credit for any success because they think it's going to make them raise in status. And we can show this in lots of different ways. And I'll tell you one of my favorite experiments. But we show also in the second half of the paper that when we actually acknowledge the contributions of others, we expand the status pie. So the person you acknowledge, they raise in status, but so do you, right? Because we really value people that are generous leaders. And one of my favorite studies that we did is we just said to people, like, think about a time when you felt insecure at work, or think about a time when you felt secure at work, And then later we said, okay, imagine you just got a promotion at work. Write your tweet about it. You're going on Twitter, and this was when it wasn't X, it was still Twitter. But and then we didn't give them any instructions. And we just looked to see, do they just focus on themselves or do they acknowledge other people? So someone might say, I did it. I finally got my promotion. I'm so proud of myself. Or they might say, I'm so excited. I just got this promotion. I wouldn't be here today without my amazing mentor. Or, my teammates supported me so much. And what we found is that when we just randomly assign people to recall a time when they felt insecure, they were much less likely to acknowledge the contributions of others in their tweets. And so that's just sort of a simple little example of that. But they're hurting themselves, right? Because in an attempt to raise their status, they're actually counterproductively undermining their status. And so, both those studies, I think, are also really really important. I would say maybe the foundational element of the whole book is something you said earlier, which is I reflected on my own experiences. And notice both of these really start with reflections, right? I reflected on a time about my values. I reflected on a time when I felt secure. And one of the things that we've shown is one of the single best things you can do for anyone before a high stakes situation, a job interview, for example, a presentation, is you just have them think about a time when they were their best version of themselves, when they gave a great talk, when they were successful. And that really puts people into a much better psychological frame of mind. When you get people to think about the times they were super, they go out and actually are super later on. And so it's really about the power of reflection.
Mhm. It's a great segue to my next question, which is how can we be more inspiring? Some people, I think, I don't know if this is a fair statement, but I think, some people, it may becomes a little easier and it's more their
Yep.
nature to be inspiring. And there are others that maybe more lean toward the infuriating as their
Yep.
natural tendency. So, if you wanted to change that and be more inspiring, do you have some recommendations on what people can do to try and be a little bit more inspiring in their sort of everyday life?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the word reflection, and I'm going to talk about two different forms of reflection. I'm going to give you, I've come up with this since the book was written, unfortunately, but I really love it now. And I have an acronym. I call it reap what you sow. And I mentioned the idea that if you put inspiring energy out, you get it back, just like in the Bible, right? Like, what you give, you get. But my reap is a homonym of REAP, it's REIP. And the first word is reflect, right? So reflect on your own experiences, right? And think about times when you were inspired or fruiting. And the second one is what I call emulation. That's the E. And just think about who has been inspired you, and think about what was it about that person that inspired you. And think about multiple different types of people. And I'll tell you a very quick story, which I think gets at this. Is when I started teaching in 1999. So I can't believe it's been more than 25 years now. I had an amazing mentor named Brian Utzi, but he had a very distinct teaching style. He'd kind of stand like this, and he put his hands, and he talked in this sort of dramatic voice. And so the first time I stalled, I thought, this is how you have to teach. And and it was a total disaster. And eventually I learned my style. About 8 years later, Lauren Nordgren, a professor, was coming to the United States. He's American, but he'd been a professor in Amsterdam. And I was assigned to be his mentor. I said, sit on my leadership class every morning, but every afternoon, I want you to sit on one of the other 3 faculty members. And we're all successful, but we all had completely different styles. I already mentioned Brian's style. I have a lot of humor. Vicky Medvick tells these war stories from consulting. Kathy Phillips spoke from the heart and talked about her research. And so he said it was amazing because if he just watched me, he would have just copied me. But he got little parts of things from each of them and was able to kind of construct his own style. And he got the best ratings of anyone the first time they'd ever taught. And so I think not just thinking about one person that inspired you, but it could be lots of different people, and think about what's the thing that you could emulate, that you could copy. And then if we take those reflections, those emulations, and then we can actually create an intention. That's the I. And then we can practice that intention. That's the P. So reflect, emulate, intend, and practice. And that's one of the ways that we can do that. And I'll just give you, one example. I'll give you 2 examples from my own experience of ways. Is I was chair of my department for 6 years. And so one of the ironic things of becoming chair is in some ways I had to speak less at faculty meetings rather than more, because, I should draw out the perspectives of others. And so early on, one of my colleagues, Madhu Bekinol, is like, you're talking too much in the faculty meetings as chair. And so we created a system where she would text me if I was talking too much. And so I'd feel the buzz, and I'm like, sometimes I think, I didn't think I was talking that much, and it was my wife who had texted me. But it was this way of like just having an outside observer, because sometimes we get caught in the moments of doing that. And the second thing is, my dad was this amazing person. He had so many inspiring traits, but he had one infuriating flaw, which is he had this explosive anger. Like, literally it spilled milk, and he exploded in anger. And, early on with my own boys, I had that, and I could see the terror it put in their eyes. And so I really trained myself to be like, okay, you can't lose your stuff, eventually I stopped screaming, but I'd go like, "Ugh!" And that was even too much for them, so I had to train myself. But here's the thing that was great is that every time I started to feel my temper start to erupt and I stopped it, I felt so good about myself. And then I think, okay, that was great. I got to do it again the next time. And so it actually kind of inspired me to do it again the next time. So even those small steps, and then I would lose it and I would feel a little shame, but not too much, and be like, okay, I got to do better next time. And so I think I've really gotten to the point where I can't think of a time where I really lost my temper in the last year.
Incredible. Do you
Yeah.
think the more often you sort of use these strategies, the more that will become your more natural tendency? So, you mentioned you and the anger, and as you say, now you find it that that's not your sort of go-to reaction. So, does practice really matter?
Yeah, practice makes perfect. I mean, it really does. And there's been other people that have done this, amazing research on the development of habits. Right, Wendy Wood is one of these individuals, and I think that we really do develop habits. And some a good example I think is like for me is flossing. Right, at some point like I was like, okay, I'm going to commit to flossing, and there's not a day go by where I don't floss now. Right, and so we just get very used to that, and it's amazing. One of my advisors, Dale Miller, likes to tell the story. His favorite example of this is seatbelts. Like he's like, when I was younger, people didn't wear seatbelts, and you put it on, and you feel like, oh my God, I'm being strangled by this thing. Like it's, and he says, now if I don't put on a seatbelt, I'm like, I feel like I'm about to go through the windshield at any moment, and just, how we get used to different ways of being. And it creates intentionality at the beginning, but it becomes more second nature over time. Now, the one thing we always have to remember is the more pressure we feel, the more anxiety we experience, we tend to fall back on sort of our core tendencies. And so another thing I think just to remind ourselves is that when you're going into a high stakes situation is to remind yourself of the habits that you want to express and not the ones that might naturally come out.
Great strategy. I want to ask you if there was one finding that really surprised you. If there was something that really sticks out that you thought, I would have never guessed that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, one finding that I really love that I started studying many years ago, and some of these have all come from sort of real world experiences, and I talked a little about shame a minute ago, is this idea of that how powerful insecurity is, right? And so there's a whole other line of research I've done that I call the little tyrant effect. And that's when someone has power, they control an important resource like reimbursements at a university, for example, but their position lacks status. It's not a high status position. And those people can sometimes be the most infuriating, and it all started because when I was at another university, we had someone like that, and she was kind of like the soup Nazi in Seinfeld. You had to like hand her the receipts the exact way, or she would get so mad at you, and she had red tape, you couldn't cross this line, and stuff like that. And she really like lorded that over people. And someone told me the secret to success with her, which is she couldn't travel both economically, but she also had some health issues, a kidney issue that prevented her traveling, but she loved snow globes. So if you came back from your travels with a snow globe, then, your reimbursements miraculously expedited. But the reason why I like that story is because she really, wanted to feel like she mattered, right? And so bringing a snow globe was really elevating her, right? And saying that I thought about you. And so sometimes, we see leaders who are infuriating, and we get so mad at them. But one of the things that we can do is we can think, what can I do to make them feel more secure? And that might turn them into inspiring. And so it's kind of like, how do we turn our leaders into inspiring people we want them to be?
Amazing. Thank you. I now want to turn to a segment called Our Readers Want to Know. So these are questions from our book club members. And so, yeah. So one member says, being inspiring helps others feel better, but what will it do for me?
Yep. Well, I'll give you a story about a president of a bank who had 1,200 employees. And he sends a birthday greeting to every employee every year. And he showed me an example of it. It's like, hey, Joanna, happy birthday. Hope you had a great weekend. How was bowling? So Joanna, in this case, loves bowling. And so that's all he writes. And he sends like 3 to 5 a day. It takes him about 10 minutes only. He does it over his coffee. He's got an Excel sheet, right? Obviously, it helps. But then he sends me these, like the email responses are like a novel back. Oh my God, bowling was amazing, blah, blah, blah. And he said, he started doing it to acknowledge them. But when he gets the responses back, he said, it puts a smile on my face, And so when you acknowledge someone and you see them being, they feel good, but you feel good, right? It goes back to like when we acknowledge the contributions of others, we raise their status, but we also raise our own status. And so it is good for other people, but it's also good for you. I'll tell you just a story I've never told ever on a podcast, but I'll tell you really quickly. So when I was at Princeton, I was at Princeton from 93 to 98, and I'm a naturally extroverted person. So I was just talking to the secretarial pool. It was 4 women, and I just, got to learn about them. And, one person loved gambling, one had a special needs child, and, I chat with them. And then like 4 years into my PhD, I noticed one day that every single PhD student had an envelope in their box but me. So I said to someone, what's the envelope? And they're like, that's our monthly bill. I was like, or what? She's like, yeah, I bill for phone calls and copies. They had never charged me. So I had never been charged. They just liked me. And so they, so when you're nice to people, people want to be nice to you, and we feel good being nice to the people that are nice to us. So I really believe reap. Like it's good for you, but it's good for them, but it's also good for you.
Yeah. And, sometimes those old adages about being kind to others really matter.
Yeah.
So our next reader wants to know, everyone's feeling stressed and overworked these days and tired. And, inspiring can sometimes take a little bit more energy. And so do you have any strategies or recommendations when you are kind of feeling really at the end of your rope and you don't have a lot more to give, how you find that little bit of extra to be a little bit more inspiring?
Yeah, I think 2 things. One is, going back to self-reflection, right? It matters, like to say, look, I'm so depleted right now. Like I need someone to help pick me up a little bit. And I think just acknowledging that, is okay, and just saying, and when those people lift us up, then that, helps us feel that sense of connectiveness, and that's sort of very, very nourishing. But again, I think that, we benefit when we turn our focus outward rather than inward sometimes. And so sometimes when I'm feeling depleted, if I can help someone else, that might actually give me the energy I need. And so, for me, helping my kids gives me energy, right? And makes me feel, delight. And so I think that sometimes we think, I need to protect myself in order to help others, but sometimes helping others actually helps protect ourselves. And so it's kind of reversing, I guess, the causal path.
Mm-hmm. Your book has a lot of movie references. So I'm assuming you're a movie buff.
I am.
What is your favorite inspirational movie?
That's a good question. I really, really love movies in which people help others. I was thinking about the other day, and one of my favorite movies is called Ghost Town with Ricky Gervais. And I don't know if you've seen this, or is out there, but he basically has a procedure and he dies for a second, and then now all these like ghosts can see him, and they're all on Earth because they have unfinished business, and they keep like chasing him, and he's so mean to them. And finally has an epiphany that he decides to start helping them. And he walks up to this old lady, says, you said something about a letter. And she's like, yeah, my daughters are fighting because they don't know that I put this letter, but it got stuck under the carpet. And if they only knew, my one daughter would talk to the other. So he goes to the daughter, and she discovers it. I'm going to start crying a little bit because I love this movie so much. And then you see her vanish, right? She goes up into presumably heaven. So he just goes around helping people and sort of, helping them, let go of the thing that's holding them back. And there's another movie recently that I was just thinking about. I can't remember what it was. I've been watching so many movies with my kids, but it just reminded me of that idea of Groundhog Day. So I saw it on the movie coming back from spring break with my kids, and Bill Murray, and wants to seduce this woman. So he learns everything about her, but it doesn't work. And then he tries to, steal money and buy Cadillacs, and that doesn't work. And, he keeps waking up every day. It's the same day. And eventually he just starts helping people. Kid falls from a tree and really hurts himself. So he gets there every day, 10:15 to catch the kid. There's a guy who chokes and dies on eating meat. So he shows up at the restaurant just as the guy's choking and gets the thing out. And then, all the people love him. And then this woman, falls in love with him. And then he finally wakes up and it's the next day. And so it's really, yeah, I guess, it's funny. I talked about values before, and I have a values card in my wallet, and I'll show it to you if I can find it really quickly. But it's, I have this, this values card, and it's got my values on it, my top 5 values, and generosity is my top value. So you can sort of see why, generosity of spirit really, really matters to me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love the idea of carrying around a card with your values.
Yeah.
You can look at whenever. That's amazing. That's a great strategy. That's a great
And based on
strategy.
some of the research, we do this with every MBA student. We have them do their values, and then we give them a laminated value card with their class year, with all the classes' values, and then their top 5 on the other side.
I'm going to start doing that. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for that tip.
Sure.
So this is a question for me, because
Okay.
it's a podcast about reading and reading for well-being. What are you reading these days? And do you have a recommendation for our readers and listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I'm my 2 ones are my colleagues have both written books recently here at Columbia Business School. One is Michael Morse wrote a book called Tribal, which is really just an amazing about a lot of the ways that culture and group interaction affect people, and how we can understand some of the peculiarities of American society today right through that. And the other is my colleague Sandra Motz. She wrote book. I have it right here. Mind Masters. That's right. So I want to make sure I have the right title. But she's done this amazing big data work of understanding people's personalities, on Facebook and things like that. But she also talks a lot about how to protect your data in the world of big data. And a good example is I think 23andMe just went bankrupt, right? And so anyone who did there, she's you can trust the people today, but you don't know who's going to own your data tomorrow. So you want to protect it today now she's telling people delete your data before the sale goes through, right? And you still have a chance to do that. So.
I actually have a copy of both those books, and
Oh, that's amazing.
I haven't read them yet, but I definitely will, because they sound great.
Yeah.
I'm just mindful of time. Final thought on how to be more inspiring.
Yeah, I just think it takes just, again, going back to the REIP, right? Reflect, emulate, intend and practice. And I think it's really the key. And, the final thing, which I said before is, we're not going to be perfect. We're always going to have our infuriating moments. Take accountability, but don't, feel that shame that really forces us to flee or to fight.
Thank you so much for being with us and giving us your insights. The book is Inspire, The Universal Path for Leading Yourself and Others by Dr. Adam Galinsky. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so much fun.